You can go ahead.
The wrath of God was a determining factor in the Old Testament. It was what was threatened against anyone or anything that went against him. The topic I chose was this, because there is a bright side no matter how bad things can get in the world. With all the wrath that is in the Old Testament, there are many passages that there is hope and other grace that can come along with it. The New Testament gives us this. It not only has His grace and wrath, but it combines both of them to see what we can be saved from. The main verse is from Romans, and it is about the gospel of Christ. And this introduces the grace of God that He promised in the Old Testament. And Paul is the one that wrote Romans. He wrote it on his third missionary trip to Corinth, and it was in the year 59 AD. So with the history taken care of, we can dive deeper into the main verse and its supporting verses. The main verse is from Romans chapter 1, verse 18. It says here, "For the wrath of God is revealed from heavens against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who hold the truth in unrighteousness." This basically says that all those who are have no God or anything will suffer His wrath. But there is hope, because in Ephesians chapter 2, verse 8 to 9, there is the grace that God promised. "For by grace we are saved through faith, and that not for ourselves, it is the gift of God." This is the gift that God was promising all the people in the Old Testament. All the wrath that they had to suffer through was for His grace. Also in 1 Thessalonians chapter 1, chapter 2, verse 10, it says, "And to wait for His Son from heaven, whom He raised from the dead, even Jesus, which delivered us from the wrath to come." Jesus saved us from His wrath that would come to us without Him. Our ungodliness and unrighteousness would bring that on to ourselves. And then again in Romans 5:9, we have it says, much more than being now justified by His blood, we shall be saved from the wrath through Him. This is Christ's blood which He gave for us. It's saving us still from His wrath. We've all heard the tale of Sodom and Gomorrah, correct? So, it is from Genesis chapter 19, from which I'm taking the story. Here in verse 5, we can see that "And they called unto Lot, and said to him, Where are the men which came into this night? Bring them out unto us, that we may know them." The men they're talking about are the angels God sent to destroy the city. But in the context of the chapter before this, Abraham was talking with God and said, "If you can find any man that is worth saving, can you spare them?" So this is what they came to do. They found Lot and everyone in the city that was for God. And later, in verse 9 to 15, it says, "And they said, Stand back. And they said again, This one fellow came into the Sorgon, and he will needs to be a judge. Now we will deal worse with thee than with them." And they pressed sore upon the man, even Lot, and came near to break the door. But the men put forth their hand and pulled Lot into the house to them, and shut to the door. So these men are saving Lot from the ungodly men, the men that do not fear God. These men are trying to make sure that they can do what they want without God interfering. later on in verse 24 of Genesis chapter 19, it says, "Then the Lord rained upon Sodom and upon Gomorrah brimstone and fire from the Lord out of heaven." This brimstone and fire that they're talking about is only a small part of what his wrath could have been. He could have wiped everyone out in a swift move, but he used that. Now I have a video that shows you this example. As you can see, there's raining down upon the city everything that God said there would be. So, as you can see, the destruction would have been immense, that they wouldn't have been able to survive that. So, with that video, you could see the destruction that God was causing. But God saved Lot from the city, along with his wife and 2 daughters. But they told him one instruction: do not look back upon the city, for there will be consequences. Wife's Lot did look back. She was turned into a pillar of salt. That was a consequence for her disobeying God, another form of wrath. But with all these things of how God will enact his wrath upon us, we must remember that we have been saved through Christ. His death made us whole and free from God's wrath. We should all be thankful we do not have to deal with his wrath alone, but through Christ. This is with believers and non-believers, no matter what, because Christ loves us, no matter if we believe in God or if we don't.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Bobby.